Every jet engine has a job most passengers never think about. It doesn't just push the plane forward. On almost every airliner ever built, it also secretly powers half the things inside. The air you breathe, the heat that melts ice off the wings, the push that starts the engines. For about 70 years, planes did this by stealing hot air straight out of the engine. It's called bleed air, and it was simply how flying worked. Then, Boeing built the 787 Dreamliner and did something nobody else has copied since. They cut almost all of it out. So here are 5 things you should know about the no-bleed design on the 787 and why, all these years later, it's still the odd one out. Let's get into it. Number 1, it broke a rule that every other jet followed. First, let's understand what bleed air actually is, because it's simpler than it sounds. Inside a jet engine, air gets squeezed until it's under huge pressure and very hot. Engineers figured out long ago that you could tap into that squeezed air and pipe it around the plane to do other jobs. That tapped air is bleeding air, and it does a lot. It pressurizes the cabin so you can breathe. It runs the air conditioning. It keeps ice from building up on the wings. It even helps spin the engines up when starting them. To move all that hot air around, planes need big metal pipes running through the whole aircraft, plus valves and joints to control it. It works. It's been working since the jet age began. But Boeing looked at it and asked a bold question. What if we just didn't? The 787 became the first Boeing jet to mostly ditch bleed air and run those systems on electricity instead. And here's the part that surprises people. More than 15 years after it entered service, the 787 is still the only large airliner in the world doing this. Even the newer Airbus A350 uses traditional bleed air. Even Boeing's own upcoming 777X went back to the old way. That tells you something important. This design was genuinely radical, and it's still one of a kind. Number 2, the engines got simpler, lighter, and cheaper. So, if the engines aren't feeding air to the whole plane, what does the plane run on? Electricity, and a lot of it. The 787 makes its own power using 6 generators, 2 big ones on each engine, plus 2 more on the small extra engine in the tail. Together, they can pump out roughly 1.5 megawatts. To picture that, this one airplane makes enough electricity to power a small neighborhood. It's the most electric big airliner ever built. That power now runs the things bleed air used to. The cabin pressure and air conditioning, starting the engines, and a clever wing anti-ice system that uses electric heat like a warm blanket built right into the wing, instead of blasting hot air through it. Boeing says that electric version uses about half the power the old air blasting method needed. And here's the quiet win. Once you stop piping hot air everywhere, you can rip out all the hardware that carried it. The valves, the fittings, hundreds of pounds of heavy titanium ducting. The engines themselves lose parts they no longer need. Fewer parts means less weight, less complexity, and lower cost. Not everything went away though. A little bleed air is still used in a couple of spots, like keeping ice off the front lip of the engine. So it's not truly zero, it's just close. Number 3, the efficiency payoff is real, but let's be honest about the number. Here's the big reason Boeing did all this. Taking air out of an engine is wasteful. When you steal that squeezed air, the engine has to work harder and burn more fuel to make up for it. And a lot of that energy just gets thrown away after it's used. It's a bit like running your car's engine harder just to power the radio. By going electric, the 787 pulls up to about 35% less power out of its engines than the old bleed system would. Boeing says the system's change alone saves roughly 3% in fuel. Now here's where a lot of videos get this wrong. So let's be clear. That 3% is not how much fuel the whole plane saves. It's only what this one design choice contributes. The full 787 is roughly 20 to 25% more efficient than the older planes it replaced. But that comes from everything working together. The carbon fiber body, the lighter wings, the modern engines, the smoother shape. The no-bleed system is one slice of that pie, not the whole pie. Still, in an industry where saving 1% is a big deal, a solid 3% from smarter plumbing alone is a serious win. Number 4, even the hydraulics got rethought. Hydraulics are the muscles of an airplane. They're what actually moves the heavy stuff, like the flaps on the wings, the landing gear, and the brakes. The idea is simple. The pilot makes a small input, and pressurized fluid turns that into serious force. Normally, bleed air helps pressurize these systems. On the 787, Boeing rebuilt the setup around electric pumps instead. The plane still has 3 separate hydraulic systems for safety, so if one fails, others take over. But the middle one runs entirely on big electric pumps with no engine-driven pumps at all. And they push the pressure higher from the traditional 3,000 psi up to 5,000 psi. Here's why that's smart. Higher pressure means you can use smaller, thinner pipes and parts to do the same work. Kind of like how a thinner hose can still blast water hard if you crank the pressure. Smaller parts means less weight. Again, number 5. 15 years in, the real world has proven it works. This is the part the early videos couldn't tell you, because back then it was still a promise. Boeing expected benefits. Now we actually know. More than 1,200 Dreamliners have been delivered, with around 2,250 ordered in total, and they've piled up millions of flight hours across dozens of airlines. That's a mountain of real data, and it backs up the design. Lower fuel burn, lower emissions, very strong reliability, meaning the planes leave on time and don't sit broken at the gate. And they've proven themselves on brutally long flights over oceans, which is the hardest test there is. The lighter weight and lower fuel burn also stretch how far the plane can fly, which is exactly why the 787 opened up so many new long routes around the world. But let's stay honest, because there's a fair counterpoint. Boeing promised simpler maintenance with fewer parts, and that's partly true. Yet electrical systems bring their own headaches. All that power makes heat that has to go somewhere, and mechanics had to learn a very different kind of aircraft. Boeing has spent years quietly polishing the software and the maintenance guidance based on what airlines learned the hard way. The program also went through a rough stretch with production quality, which paused deliveries for a while and forced much stricter factory inspections before planes started flowing again. So here's where it all lands. The no-bleed idea was a genuine gamble. Boeing bet that electricity could replace a system every jet had relied on for decades. 15 years and over 1,000 planes later, that bet clearly paid off. The strange part is that nobody followed. The A350 didn't. Even Boeing's own 777X didn't. Which leaves one really interesting question hanging in the air. Was the 787 simply ahead of its time and everyone else just hasn't caught up yet? Or did the rest of the industry look at this bold idea, run the numbers, and quietly decide the old way was good enough after all? If you enjoyed learning how the Boeing 787 rewrote the rules of aviation, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next aviation deep dive. Thanks for watching Skyscope Aviation, and let us know in the comments which aircraft or technology should we explain next.